Is growth the best thing to do for poverty, economic growth? क्योंकि इस हॉल में बहुत सारे बंदे मानते नहीं वो कहते हैं growth नहीं करो, poverty को fix करो. Tell us what's the story.
So the World Bank's masthead says we want to live in a world free of poverty.
Yeah.
In order to keep their dream alive, they keep changing the poverty line. And let me tell you how that is highly misleading. And I'll just give an example of how this is an international business about manufacturing poverty. Look, don't get me wrong. As I said, the poor will always be with us, the rich will always be us. The responsibility for every society is to take care of the bottom 1/3 or quarter of the population. That's absolutely God-given responsibility.
It's a great honor to welcome Surjit Bhalla. I think many people in Pakistan know him, but those who don't, let me tell you, Bhalla has been everywhere. Bhalla has written about cricket. He's written 2 books on cricket. You'd be amazed. He's figured out who the best cricketer, batsman, bowler, etc. is. Very econometric exercise. And he's also written a lot on India, on the global situation, on poverty, on many subjects. Bhalla has been in the World Bank, in India, in Goldman Sachs, or what was it? Morgan Stanley. Goldman Sachs, or something like that. He's been in 2 investment banks in New York, writing, analyzing the world economy and giving it to them. Then he went back to India, selling a newsletter to the world, as well as doing cricket analysis, which is his passion. His passion is cricket. He can tell you all the scores in the world. So Bhalla is a great cricketer, and I introduced him to Shahid Kardar yesterday, who comes from a cricketing family, as you know. So Bhalla has also, his last appointment was, he was in the IMF as executive director. So here you'd be surprised, why are we talking to Bhalla? Well, Surjit Bhalla has written a very good book on poverty, which was received very differently in the world. So let me begin by asking Surjit Bhalla to tell about his book, Imagine There Is No Country. Why did you call it that? And why was it received with by a mixed audience? Go ahead, Surjit.
Thank you, Nadeem, and it's a real pleasure to be here. This is, I think, my 5th visit to Pakistan. I first came here in 1980 to watch a cricket match between Pakistan and the West Indies. That was in 1980. Now, coming to Imagine There's No Country. The first point I want to make in the course of this book, what emerged for me, was that I don't want to use the phrase poverty is a business, but poverty is an intellectual business, first and foremost. And the reason it is an intellectual business is that I did not find, and this is all published in the book, that there's that much intellectual honesty by the main practitioners, which in this case was the World Bank. And there are 2 points on the intellectual honesty bit. There are 2 points on the intellectual honesty bit. The first, that if they were really intellectually honest, then they would acknowledge that poverty has declined, and then ask the second question, why has poverty declined? And then ask the third question, what else can we do to improve the decline of poverty? So, in other words, it is well recognized, well accepted, that societies should take care, redistribute towards the bottom 1/3 or bottom 1/4 of the population, whichever you. So that is well accepted. That was not my contention. My contention was that we accept that, and what can we do to improve the function? One of the major results of that book. And it is in the end, it's in the last page of the last chapter, which says, it is growth stupid. Remember in the early 90s, Bill Clinton had made famous the phrase, it is the economy stupid. So by arguing that it is growth, and this was empirically, this was not asserted, this was empirically documented throughout the book, that the biggest and the most important and perhaps 90% of the episodes of poverty reduction have first and foremost got to do with economic growth. You can perhaps explain why, what to me was obvious, the results were obvious, why is it that it met with a mixed reception? This particular phrase, that it is growth, that is what met with a mixed reception. Because what it meant was that there's less role. There's a role for policy to go ahead and accelerate growth. And by that, you'll kill two birds with one stone. You'll accelerate growth. You'll reduce poverty. Why this notion that growth is somehow not, and actually I think I did use the phrase, it is sufficient. By that I didn't mean that you don't have to do anything else. Obviously you have to do something else. But in addition to growth, because what you want to achieve, first and foremost, around the world, is inclusive growth. And how do we measure inclusive growth? It is that the growth, increase in incomes of the bottom 20, 25, bottom third of the population should exceed the economic growth of the average. So you will achieve most of your
before we go there,
Before we go there,
let me quickly ask you a question. Can you define poverty for me? Is there an absolute definition, or is it just we are kind of fishing for a definition? Do we have a definition?
Okay. And this is, let me just put my chair back so that I like to move my hands and everything else, and therefore it comes. Look, जो मेरे को समझ नहीं आता. Look, I think the major thing I have learned over the last 75 years or so is that the world has changed. And policymakers need to acknowledge that the world has changed. Now let me explicitly answer your question. In the beginning, and let's make the beginning 1950, when we got our independence, and most developing countries had got their independence by 1960. So let's date it 1960. That no matter what measure of poverty you took, there was a lot of poverty in the world. Hunger, okay? No roof over your head. Whether you want to go into begging or whatever, roti, kapda, makan, तीनों चीजें नहीं थी. For most of the population, I'm not talking about the elite, I'm talking for most of the population, three necessary ingredients of life, of well-being, were not there. That's when it made sense to talk about absolute poverty. That's absolute.
Medieval era में लोगों के पास मोमबत्ती भी नहीं थी, गोश्त भी नहीं खाते थे.
Yeah.
तो अब hasn't poverty declined?
Yeah.
So what are you worried
this
about?
Is the point. Look, you're talking about medieval India or medieval anywhere in the world. Now, अब क्या है? वो कहाँ गया मेरा? आपके पास भी है सबसे बात. अगर किसी के पास ये नहीं है, वो गरीब है. So our needs change. Remember what we've gone through as economists, what Nadeem and I and some of my friends and colleagues have gone through, is tremendous change. And what constituted poverty in 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago is not poverty. So all I'm pleading for, first we had absolute poverty. Now we have relative poverty. That doesn't mean you don't have poor. By definition, the poor will always be with us, the rich will always be with us, and hopefully in between, the middle class will grow more and more, will occupy the larger share.
पर फिर मुझे बताइए, ये जो पॉवर्टी इंडस्ट्री है, वो हमारी पॉवर्टी गिरने नहीं देती. हमारी पॉवर्टी थी एक ज़माने में, कितनी थी शुजात साहब? 15-20% थी. हमारी पॉवर्टी गिरने ही नहीं देते. जिस वक्त वो गिरती है, आप लाइन चेंज कर देती है. तो ये जो पॉवर्टी लाइन है, ये कोई एब्सोल्यूट तरीका है लगाने का? कोई तरीका है जो हम कहें हाँ भाई ये लाइन ठीक है, या ये लाइन सारा वक्त सारी ज़िंदगी बदलती रहेगी?
ये आपके
sorry, it was 34% in 2001 and it declined to 12.9% in 2010 and then we rebase in poverty in 2013. अगर हम वो पुरानी पावर्टी लाइन लें तो शायद आज 4-5% हो, लेकिन हमने 2013 में उसको रीबेस किया और फिर उसको बढ़ा दिया और 29 पे ले गए. तो जाहिर है ये
और अब वर्ल्ड बैंक 40 पे चली गई.
ये जो एक्चुअली पॉवर्टी लाइन का जो मसला है, let me expand on that a little bit, because a lot stems from the World Bank's masthead, which says, and I was at the World Bank for 16 years, and Ijaz was there for a long time. You were on the opposite side of the street, but it's the same concept. So the World Bank's masthead says we want to live in a world free of poverty.
Yeah.
In order to keep their dream alive, they keep changing the poverty line. And let me tell you how that is highly misleading. And I'll just give an example of how this is an international business about manufacturing poverty. Look, don't get me wrong. As I said, the poor will always be with us, the rich will always be us. The responsibility for every society is to take care of the bottom 1/3 or quarter of the population. That's absolutely God-given responsibility. So when I say that this needs to be done, that is being done badly, please keep that in mind. Now let me give you an example of the percentages of poor. So in the mid-90s, and I think this is a lesson whether it's for Pakistan or any other country, in the mid-90s, leading economists, through a World Bank project, like Angus Deaton, who won a Nobel Prize, published, based on their research on the World Bank, living standards indicators, the measurement of your consumption to determine whether you're poor or not should be considerably or a little bit more refined in order for you to correctly assess as to who was poor and who was not poor. So they recommended that, look, the traditional since 1951 in India, and I'm sure in Pakistan and anywhere else, you went to a household and you asked, look, how much salt did you consume in the last 30 days? In India, it's very important. They still measure salt. And I think it's from the salt march. And I've kept telling them for 20 years now, is swal ko nikal do. But anyway, the point being, everything was measured on a 30-day recall basis. Look, over the last 30 days, how much wheat did you consume? How much salt did you consume? How many shirts you bought? How many motorcycles you bought? How many cars you bought? Everything was there. How many eggs did you buy? And then you figured out that this is the total consumption and this falls below the $1 a day, this certain level. Okay. Now, what the Angus Deaton World Bank recommended is that, listen, you should measure consumption according to the item. So for eggs, fruits, vegetables, you should measure it on a 7-day basis. Most items you should measure on 30-day, and consumer durables including shirts, etc., you should measure how much is your consumption on a 365-day basis. Okay. So,
And depends
this
on
is
your memory.
Really relevant.
Depends on your memory.
Huh. Yeah.
याददाश्त पे है ना?
So then, in 2011-12, they did two separate surveys. The government of India did two separate independent surveys. In one, they asked the question of the traditional measure, uniform recall period, and the other, more accurate measure, which is fruits, vegetables, etc. What was the difference? Same year, same economic conditions, same policies. One measure gave you 23% poor. The other, more accurate measure gave you 13% poor. Guess which measure did the World Bank take? 23%. Acha. So that's 100 million people. 100 million people. So now, then you have the same firms. You know, I love being at the World Bank. I think I learned a lot there, so don't get me wrong. But I think policy makers, the World Bank, etc., needs to recognize, needs to change with its times. So now a recent controversy has arisen in India as to how much poverty decline there has been. Actually, not recent, it's age-old. And what you found was this new concept called multidimensional poverty, which I don't want to go into too much detail. But between 2015 and 2020, वो सब बैंड बजा रहे हैं कि look, multi-dimensional poverty in India brought 135 million people out of poverty in 6 years. मैं कह रहा हूँ, अरे सेम साल में कोई पॉलिसीज नहीं, कोई कुछ नहीं, बिजनेस एज यूजुअल, आपने करेक्टली मेजर की है, उससे आपका 100 मिलियन पोर लेस है. तो ये क्या कर रहे हैं आप? सो आई थिंक, लुक, this measurement is very important because it is, I keep telling Nadeem, keep telling anybody who wants to listen, data is the new oil. आपके पास ऑयल नहीं है, हमारे पास ऑयल नहीं है, हमारे पास डेटा है. आप डेटा को एनालाइज करो, उससे इन्फॉर्म्ड पॉलिसी करो, and the rest everything will fall into place.
But अगर हमारा डेटा जो है is open to misinterpretation, तो फिर हम क्या करें? इतनी सब्जेक्टिविटी मेजर में है जो आपने कहा है, there's so much subjectivity, multi-time. एक तो इंडिकेटर्स भी बहुत ज़्यादा हैं, $1 a day, $2 a day, पता नहीं कितने, calorie, so many indicators. So what do we learn from it? I mean, do we learn anything by taking a poverty indicator? Does it tell us anything, or is it subject to manipulation?
Well, what we've learned is that आपने calories बात की. I just want to relate. This is in 1980. The big fashion from the World Bank, okay, was to measure poverty through calories. Each narrative has to have some plausibility in it. And let me explain this narrative. Clearly food is very important. So therefore, let's measure poverty by how many calories you're doing. So for the World Bank, I did a paper while as an employee of the World Bank on calories and their usefulness for measuring poverty. And what I showed was that in the US, right, which was then acknowledged as the richest country, probably still is, but in the US, in the mid-70s, they did a nutrition survey. And in that nutrition survey, they went using all the latest methods, etc., including, they told me when I talked to the surveyors, that hamburger को आप जब cook करते हैं तो काफी तेल निकलता है. A lot of calories come out. So they actually measured how much non-tail was there in a hamburger cooked. What you found out when you accurately measured your calories, that 83% of the women were malnourished in US at the peak of the, and the World Bank refused to publish my report. It was done for them. They refused to even bring it out as a working paper in 1980. Commissioned by them for the World Development Report. They said, "Nahi, this is," etc. I don't want to go there. But the point being, okay, it took 20 more years, 1990 and the late 90s, it started to be accepted. ये जो calories है, to measure poverty through calories is nonsense.
Okay.
So this is the part, now they need to accept that relative poverty is what is most important, that absolute poverty, except for about 200 million people in sub-Saharan Africa, is not relevant for anywhere else. So how does Europe? Everybody is concerned with poverty measurement, politically, economically, welfare point, it's very important. But they have now moved to a concept of relative poverty. Where are you with respect to somebody on the 60th percentile of income? Which is, I think, correct. So it's coming back to, it's income, stupid. It's, measure how much income you have and then determine.
So basically, आप कह रहे हैं कि जो lower tail of the income distribution, अगर income distribution देखें, जो lower 20-15% है, वो poor है.
हाँ.
ठीक है, वो poor है. तो फिर does that mean you want a communist state? You want redistribution कि कोई इतना गरीब हो ही ना? क्योंकि income distribution में distribution का नाम ही है कि there's going to be some difference.
Yeah.
तो अगर lower लोग वो हैं poor, तो उनका हम क्या करें?
So now let's give, so in 1965, the US, and all of this is written in the books anyway. I mean, it's obviously public knowledge, but including the following. The two countries to come out with the poverty line at the same time, within 6 months apart, etc., were India and the US. Okay, the poorest country and the richest country. We came out with this poverty line in 1964-65. That was the time of the war on poverty by Lyndon Johnson in the US. So how did they decide to measure poverty in the US at that time? It was, you look at where is no calories, but where is, and food is the most important item for the poor, that where is the 30th percentile of food consumption, 1/3. If you are at the 1/3 or less, you are defined poor. Here's the interesting thing to get to what Nadeem is getting at. In 1965, there were 18% poor. In 2011, there were 18% poor. And only now, over the last 3-4 years, because they've improved their measurement, that the poverty measure by the absolute poverty line is anywhere between 9 and 12%. But they acknowledge that this is not where research should be going into. Then I don't want to get into, but perhaps this is a good time, on the business. There are two ways by which you can measure, or anything actually, employment, unemployment, poverty, etc. One is through surveys, and the other is through administrative data. One interesting thing about administrative data that just came out 2 days ago, that in the UK, they are no longer going to measure employment by surveys. Why? And they're going to use administrative data. Why? Administrative data means registered in employment, this, that. Jab bhi aapko job milta hai, you get registered into the system somewhere. But the reason they came up, and it's relevant for all of us, is that Generation Z, jo aap kafi log hain, that these guys are too distracted by mobiles and everything, and therefore they don't pay attention to surveys. So this is another aspect of how the world has changed, how we have changed, and therefore how we need to improve our understanding. They're saying, take it from administrative measure. Surveys ki bhi koi zarurat nahi hai. And we have a lot of information, no matter what the subject, as to where, which district, किस गांव में आपके सैटेलाइट इमेजेस हैं भैया, सब कुछ है, कहाँ पे गरीबी है और क्या करना चाहिए, ये भी सबको पता है। वर्ल्ड बैंक है, नदीम है, एजाज है, सालों ने काम किया हुआ है, हमें पता है क्या करना है, वो करते नहीं है, वो बात है अलग। उसका सवाल हमें सबको करना चाहिए कि व्हाई डोंट वी यूज द नॉलेज दैट एग्जिस्ट। सो व्हाट्स द पॉलिटिकल इकोनॉमी of measurement of poverty, and the road starts at the World Bank and ends at the World Bank.
अच्छा, let me, before I go to the floor, and I think I have to go to the floor very quickly, कि जो एक बात है important, poverty को eradicate करने के लिए हमारे पास instruments क्या हैं? We talk a lot about poverty, but what do we know about poverty eradication? सारा काम होता है कि हम poverty को measure करते हैं, उसके बाद हम मातम करना चाहिए, high poverty शुरू कर देते हैं. Now the question is कि is growth the best thing to do for poverty, economic growth? क्योंकि इस हॉल में बहुत सारे बंदे मानते नहीं, वो कहते हैं growth नहीं करो, poverty को fix करो. Is there
वो हो नहीं सकता, वो नहीं हो सकता.
फिर tell us what's the story is.
Now, look, obviously in a crisis, and I don't want to go into the COVID crisis and whatever, but that was a crisis. Maybe it was by lockdowns, manufactured crisis, but I don't want to go there. But what did the Indian government do? Everything is shut. For 3 months it was shut in India. Thankfully, we were the first country to enter into lockdowns, one of the first, and we were the first country to completely get out of lockdowns in 3 months. But anyway, so what happens during a lockdown? The poor cannot access food, anything, right? But food is a necessary, you can live without a roof on your head, but you can't live without food. So they then distributed and used information that is available through this to target the poor and gave them 5 kilos of either rice or wheat, whichever they wanted, per person per month. And 5 kilos was already being given to them. Now, it's very interesting on the 10 kilos that the historical consumption, and I'm sure in Pakistan it's about the same, the historical consumption of grains in India per capita is somewhere around 8 to 9 kilos. So you made ensured that because of this emergency, nobody would go hungry. And actually, the politicians or the political system, etc., well acknowledged that this was one of the major poverty reduction schemes. Now, when I presented this paper on incorporating whatever the food equivalent is, you'd be interested to know that the World Bank and the IMF, this is your institution, were not willing to accept this reality about food consumption being obtained from subsidy as part of your reduction in poverty. We haven't measured poverty this way, etc. Now they've changed. So what I'm saying is, what you earlier said, there is complete information now and analysis and historical record for 70 years in this battle against poverty. Ab khatam karo your dream and do a new dream. A new dream is opportunities. A new dream is basically mobility in generations. A new dream is where people, aspirations meet reality. Now, you won't succeed with everybody, but it's about time we had a new dream.
For example, your proposal that you were giving me just now, that in terms of measuring poverty, we should stop measuring poverty. Can you give us that proposal?
Okay. I'm also enough of a realist to recognize that it is a business, and intellectual business, mind you, most importantly. So my suggestion, I think, is very simple. I'm going to be writing it up. You decide whether 25% or 33% of the population is poor. Zakat के लिए होता है, bottom 20, 25, you decide. And maybe the World Bank decides that this bottom percentile of the population in every country at that income level is poor. So that means in the US, that income level would be $10,000 a year. In India, it'll be 1,000, whatever it is. So now I have where every country is relative to its own. So there is a poverty line for every country in the world. Okay? That is fixed. Now I assess over the next 10 years what happens in each country, and it'll be informative. Rather than the poverty line shifting all the time and numbers saying, जैसे आपने कहा पाकिस्तान में ये हो गया, 10 साल पहले ये था, ये वो, we will have a well-accepted measure of change in each country, and which the army of analysts can then analyze and say it can be done every day, every year should be done. What policies are working, what policies are not working, what you can do more. And so the poverty line is just a reference point, not even a political point, just a reference point for policymakers and academics to assess what works in helping the poor the most and what doesn't.
Good point, very good point. Dekhiye ji, this is the reason that we brought you here with great difficulty. We really need to understand what poverty is. We don't have a discussion on poverty. We just get a number and we all start lamenting. And the thing is, we've never discussed the concept of poverty. So thank you very much. I'll go to the floor. People who want to raise their hands, please, mic line ji, mic line. बड़े लोग इस पे बोलना चाहेंगे. Mic line जी, फौरन दे, इनको दे दे, पकड़ा दे. बोलें जी, बोलें जा.
बहुत शुक्रिया सुरजीत भल्ला साहब तशरीफ़ लाने का और इतनी क्लियरली समझाने का कि पॉवर्टी का कॉन्सेप्ट क्या है, और बहुत शुक्रिया नदीम साहब फॉर होस्टिंग दिस वंडरफुल इवेंट. मेरा आपसे एक सवाल है कि अगर वर्ल्ड बैंक अपना बैनर तब्दील कर दे और उस पर लिख दे वी विल टेक केयर ऑफ द बॉटम 25% फॉर एवर, विल यू बी हैप्पी विद दैट?
Just a slight rephrasing. The bottom 25% is our primary concern, wherever they are. And that is what, right now, actually, what I would like is a relative poverty line, if you really ask. But that won't be accepted. And I say yes.
Main cheez is that bottom, we'll take care of the bottom 20% or 15% or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So then that would be okay. Nadeem, in South Asia, we have two countries जिनकी बहुत ग्रोथ हुई और उनकी बहुत पॉवर्टी रिड्यूस हुई, इंडिया एंड बांग्लादेश. एंड वी हैव टू अदर कंट्रीज जिनकी ग्रोथ बहुत कम हुई, पाकिस्तान एंड नेपाल, लेकिन पॉवर्टी बहुत कम हो गई. इन दोनों के केस में इट वाज रेमिटेंसेस दैट डिड इट. सो व्हाट्स इंपॉर्टेंट इज इनकम ग्रोथ एट द हाउस होल्ड लेवल एंड नॉट नेसेसरली जीडीपी ग्रोथ. आई थिंक ये डिस्टिंक्शन ज़हन में रखना बहुत ज़रूरी है.
I think there's another point.
Yeah.
That the poor can look after themselves. They don't need the World Bank. I think ये जो mandate, भला जी ये भी बताएं, ये जो mandate poverty का है, जो कल मसूद ने भी कहा, सर मसूद अहमद ने भी कल कहा, कि जी before you guys came, उसने कहा, मैंने जब उससे पूछा कि crisis आप होने क्यों नहीं देते, उसने कहा crisis हम इसलिए नहीं होने देते because the IMF feels when a crisis happens, people like you will not be hurt. It will be the poor that will be hurt. So when did the mandate for looking after the poor pass from the poor countries themselves to the international agencies? And how did this happen?
Yeah.
You want to respond, Bhalla?
Sorry, yeah.
I was saying that when did the mandate for looking after the poor pass from countries to the international community? Because we've got all these plethora of international institutions looking after the poor. Abhi Masood was telling us there are about 100 poverty funds in the world. So, would you like to say where the mandate is?
Again, this is how times have changed. I think the World Bank and the IMF both served very important roles when they existed, when they began to exist. 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, even the 90s. But I think there is, as far as the fund is concerned, there's a G7 which rules the world. And so we don't need the IMF. And as far as the World Bank is concerned, I completely agree. It's in the hands of the people, of the countries. We don't need this colonial mindset कि वो यहाँ आएंगे, हमें बताएंगे क्या करना है, क्या नहीं करना है. Now, look, one of the major roles of the World Bank, which it has performed excellently, is transfer of knowledge, technical know-how. Many countries, including India, Pakistan, etc., didn't know much about infrastructure development or dams, and you needed technical expertise. Now, as I said, except for maybe 10 countries in the world, you don't need even that technical expertise. You can purchase it in the marketplace. All consultants are there. So think of the money that is spent. I mean, it's really a rethink is necessary. That's I want to stress.
Hello. You mentioned that 25% should be taken care of, the bottom 25%. And you based it on income. What happens when in a country 60 to 70% is informal economy, undocumented economy, and the income levels are grossly understated? Then how do you actually see that 25% calculation?
Okay. Look, very relevant point. Simple point is what you're saying, that whatever measures today exist shows, let's say 60%, a high level of poverty, much higher than 25%. Now, first and foremost, for every country, we need, and we have, improved methods of measurement. Then, there's a lot of information. If with improved methods of measurement, and this goes into tax compliance, etc., and there was a session earlier, if with improved methods of measurement, you get this, then we have now information, or let's say this country has 60% poor, we've improved the methods of measure, and it's a very high level of poverty. I would find out who its neighbors are, and by meaning researchers can find out, satellite imagery can find out, there's so much information we don't use, and then find out yahan kya problem hai. We all agree 60% poverty क्या 40 पे नहीं होनी चाहिए, 30 पे नहीं होनी चाहिए, ठीक है? अगर है उससे ज़्यादा तो उसके ऊपर रिसर्च करो ना, उसके ऊपर करो कि यहाँ क्या खूबी है और नेगेटिव खूबी है कि यहाँ पे इतनी लार्ज पॉवर्टी है. Then address. Now what you will find is that, and this goes back to what Nadeem said earlier, what you would find is that local governments are the ones most responsible for lack of progress in poverty decline. So, the fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves. You will find around the world, it's reason things don't work is that the local governments, and by local it can be national level, state level, municipal level, वहाँ पे problem है, और वहाँ पे हर जगह है, और वहाँ पे हमेशा problem होगी, but you want to decrease that. And you have information now to decrease that through this.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for nice discussion on poverty. You have well said that poverty is highly linked, that we have to focus on inclusive growth. And inclusive growth means sustained growth, as India, Bangladesh, and even China, Vietnam, they have achieved the growth that has created the job opportunity.
Yeah.
So basically, that we have to create opportunity for the poor.
Yes.
Right now, we are facing in Pakistan that there is a lot of discussion on handouts, and especially the social protection program. Lot of donors, I think more than 100 donors, they are working on poverty eradication. And we are massively spending, I think, around 1,000 billion right now. that is spent by federal and provincial government on social protection. Where stand this social protection in inclusive growth agenda?
Yeah. So look, just I guess my message in all of this research, etc., why did corporate governance came about? Corporate governance came about, and I objected it when it came in India in the early 2000s. And Infosys chairman Narayana Murthy was sitting in the audience. So I said, you don't need laws on corporate governance because the market will take care of it. I said, I don't need, at that time I was a fund manager, I don't need information from some corporate governance. And you've seen the kind of rackets that corporate governance itself has, Arthur Andersen, this, that, all the accounting firm. So the point being that let us think, so I don't believe, so what I was trying to say, maybe we need public sector governance in order to identify. We need watchdogs that say, listen, if we can do it, and I don't think we can politically in any country, but that's what you need. That look, this is the wastage. This is where you've done wrong, and same, this is where you've done right. That is what I'm arguing. Information ko hum use kare, and whether it is the firms that are doing bad or government that's doing bad, information is used to analyze and transmit information about what's going wrong. Once you know what's going wrong, it's very easy to know what to do next. I think there was one.
Sir, this is Mehtab Haider. I work for the news. This one. Sir, do you think that the data, because manipulation in the data really creates problems, and the trust deficit and the perception, for instance, in Pakistan, the labor force survey is the most controversial survey in Pakistan because of the credibility gap, and that is the problem. So when the data is wrong, so the results will also be wrong, and the policy prescription will not be the right. And my second question is, do you think the dole-outs, as in Pakistan in terms of social protection strategy, don't you think that the conditional cash transfers can help the poor to come out of the poverty? Because there are so many duplications among the center and the federating units level, and it's problematic. So do you have any empirical evidence that the conditional cash transfers can help the poor to come out of the poverty?
Let me address the first question very simply. That I've always argued the mark of a good economist is what she does with bad data, not what she does with good data. So I take it as given that the data is bad, and that's what we are supposed to do. Oh, good data leke hum kya karenge? Kisko kya batayenge? Dekho good data? Nahi. So the target is exactly the same, remains the same. You want to benefit the bottom fourth of the population. I'm in big debate whether it should be bottom fourth or bottom 33%. But anyway, and then, use the information. I mean, that's what economists are supposed to do. अरे ये data ठीक नहीं है, इसलिए ये करना. अभी you'll have competing sources of data. So that's what the analysis should be, not on that this is what I think it is. So that's the first part. The second part of your question was, maybe we can address it. ठीक है.
Okay. Just Assalamu alaikum ji. Sabra Qureshi, I'm founder of a non-profit that's been working to uplift communities at the lowest income of the economic strata. We've heard a lot about poverty today, and whenever there is any discussion on poverty, the focus seems to be on income poverty. how we define it, how we measure it, how we address it. But we all know that poverty has multiple dimensions. There are so many other aspects of poverty, whether it's poverty of opportunity, so much else. How are we measuring and addressing those non-income dimensions of poverty, which are perpetuating that vicious cycle of poverty for the bottommost strata? They, no matter what, whether it's handouts or anything else you might give them, they're not going to be able to break that vicious cycle of poverty without so many other interventions. So how are we addressing that?
And you know, I wrote my other book was called The New Wealth of Nations, came out in 2017. And in there, I present a graph worldwide on how much I have my income measure of poverty on one side for the world and from 1855. And the right-hand side and the x-axis is amount of education, okay? And primary school enrollment, then you can graduate. Whatever you do, the correlation between, they move together. Up social, think of any household, anywhere. Health, education, etc. is better when the household has more income. So we have this, you know, I don't know why there is, and in India there's a lot. For my family, I get a lot of objections when I come up with this. But you know, you tell me, वो आपको अभी मैंने मल्टी डिमेंशनल का, उसमें वो पता नहीं कहाँ से कितने बच्चे स्कूल गए हैं, कितने बच्चे 6 साल तक स्कूल नहीं गए, और फिर उन्होंने हेल्थ किया है, और फिर उन्होंने ये किया है, कोई 18 इंडिकेटर्स हैं. Anyway, so all of them are highly correlated. So the challenges, and this I've asked from the person who invented Ekide. This was about 10, 15 years ago when she first came out with this, and she gave a seminar. I said, just what would be very useful for you to sell your concept, show where it gives different results. For which country it shows, and which time period, it shows different results than a simple income measure of poverty and the change. What are you interested in the change? The income measures of poverty, ये change हुआ, आपका 18 dimension 1/8 weight यहाँ दिखा के, आप मेरे को वो दिखा दो, अभी तक दिखाया नहीं है. अब वो वर्ल्ड बैंक अडॉप्ट करता है, इंडिया अडॉप्ट करता है, सारी दुनिया, तो that's, you know, I mean, why haven't we seen? I mean, I gave you an example of how with a multi-dimensional poverty measure over 5 years, 6 years, shows the same as in the same year, the measurement that I am not recommending, that everybody else in the world is recommending. So I think my challenge to everybody, open challenge, I will change my mind. You show me that this is a measure of poverty which shows very interesting insights into the poor, which the income measure does not. Both of the measures will miss aspects of poverty. Okay? So that I'm not concerned with right now. Both of them will miss certain aspects. मेरे को ये बताओ, जो for what we all consider, they won't measure emotional poverty, they won't measure something, but what they are supposed to measure, show me. वो एक, you know, movie थी बहुत अच्छी, ये I use this phrase all the time. Jerry Maguire, आपने देखी है? तो उसमें his constant refrain is, show me the money. So mine is, show me the evidence. And then I will change, the whole world will change. I mean, everybody will change and should change once you have the evidence. मगर evidence कोई देता नहीं है.
सर मेरा क्वेश्चन है कि आईएमएफ इतना ज़्यादा सर करंट अकाउंट में आप देख लें कि सॉरी बैलेंस बजटिंग के साथ फोकस
केयर करता है, छोड़ दे उसको. आईएमएफ लिखता है पॉवर्टी पे. अब बताइए, आगे बताइए, कोई सवाल है?
सर मैं इंडिया के वाले से भी कहना चाह रहा हूँ.
क्या?
सर देखिए पॉवर्टी को एड्रेस करना बहुत मुश्किल है, टारगेट करें। इंडिया का भी सर मंत्रा सीम्स टू बी कि दैट वी विल हैव ए हाई ग्रोथ एंड देन इट विल ऑटोमेटिकली एड्रेस द पॉवर्टी।
वो तो बात कर
बट
चुके हैं ना
नॉट इन इंडिया आल्सो सर, द पॉवर्टी इज नॉट बीइंग चैलेंज टारगेटेड सो मच। सो रिडक्शन उस तरह से नहीं आ रही जिस तरह से वहाँ पे इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ होती है।
मैं कह रहा था ना, everybody in this country, Bhalla, believes that growth is bad. We actually feel growth is bad, and that poverty eradication is charity. ये is charity. We have to give charity. We are so hurt by the
No,
poor.
सवाल की है।
We have to make them. सवाल यही है, growth doesn't work.
Yeah,
As I said, Jerry Maguire, show me the evidence.
yeah, Nasser from PIDE, very simple question. Why poverty when it is a relative phenomena? Why not 20% bottom? We can always seek about 20%.
Sorry,
Yeah. The next question is why economic poverty? Why not poverty of ideas? Because we are struggling with the poverty of ideas. We are not innovative. We always talk about the economic poverty.
No, I don't think we have a poverty of ideas. I think we have a richness of ideas. I think it's the challenge is to, implement the ideas in a detached fashion. Now, it's not been possible. There are lots of debates by leading scholars, for Amartya Sen and Jagdish Bhagwati had this big debate going on for 20 years Jagdish Bhagwati and Amartya Sen had this big debate going on for 20 years, whether direct measures of poverty, which is government ko ye karna chahiye, wo karna chahiye, ye karna chahiye, or indirect measure, which is growth. And now let me take the direct measures of poverty between what has happened before and what is happening here. And this is again documented, published, etc. So in the open, there are schemes in India. We have been the biggest inventor of schemes to alleviate poverty. Okay? So you must have heard of Narega, employment. उनको employment चाहिए तो उससे हम poverty reduce करेंगे. So we'll give them Narega program. Then the PDS, public distribution system, right? Where, what I mentioned, you'll give them free grains or In 1985, Rajiv Gandhi made the following statement. And how he came about, he brought in the practitioners, the collectors, the IS officers who worked in different parts to tell him, just like we are having, to tell him, what have you learned about what works in poverty reduction or not? 1985. And then he came out with the statement that only 15%, 1/5, of the money meant for the poor actually reaches the poor. These are direct measures. These are government of India. Okay? And then we invented Narega then, and I did a study, which was published in 2011-12, as to how, Rajiv Gandhi was an optimist. Actually, much less than 10% reached the poor. That was my point, indirectly, when I said, what you'll find anywhere in the world, loko mein farak nahi hai. There are 8 billion people, and you scratch them, all of them have red blood. All of them have the same incentives. They react to the same signals. And if given a chance to be corrupt, we'll all be corrupt. We have been. So what is the purpose of policy? The purpose of policy is to help the bottom fourth to reduce corruption and to increase the efficiency of delivery. And I think now with this, there has been a considerable improvement of efficiency in delivery and considerable reduction. So much so, the Center for Global Development, which Masood Ahmed heads, and he was here, did a study on this food transfers in India during the COVID period and found, जो मैंने आप पहले बताया था कि free गेहूं दे रहे हैं, and they found that 90% of the food that was meant for the poor was given to the poor. And you know, the same country, same people, 10 years ago when we didn't have all the information, there was a lot of leakage. Now the leakage can be stopped and has been stopped. I mean, 10, 15% not reaching the poor is, you know, but you're getting a much bigger bang for your buck. And that's what I say, use information. Information provides for checks and balances to government action and to private people's action. Tax compliance, another area where checks and balances can come through. So it doesn't matter whether we're talking poor, whether you're talking taxation or whatever. Accountability has to be there. And now, fortunately, world over, because of the information revolution, you know, putting accountability is much easier than ever
Bhalla,
before.
both our countries are banning the cell phone.
Huh?
Both our countries are banning the cell phone.
Cell
We want
phone.
to protect the mobile industry. Both India and Pakistan are protecting the mobile industry, right? So we, I don't know what India is doing, but we now have been forced to go to cheaper, inferior cell phones because we can't buy the iPhone or the upgraded Samsung. But anyways, go ahead, folks.
I have
कौन बोल रहा है? बोलिए वहाँ से कौन बोल रहा है?
सलीम नाम है मेरा। पावर्टी और ग्रोथ की जो ताल्लुक है उसके बारे में तो बात हुई और शायद ग्रोथ के लिए आपको बड़ी हायर इन्वेस्टमेंट चाहिए। पावर्टी और अगर इनइक्वलिटी के बारे में कुछ बात करें कि इनइक्वलिटी शायद जल्दी अगर आप इनइक्वलिटी रिड्यूस करते हैं तो उससे आप पावर्टी रिडक्शन जल्दी अचीव कर सकते हैं बनिस्बत ग्रोथ
नहीं कर सकते जी आगे चलें बोलें
Sir, the debate here is we isolate poverty and growth. So, do you think that the inclusive growth has become ineffective? Is it not practical? Thank you.
So, what is not practical?
But please, Bhalla ji, before you answer, I want to ask, what the hell is inclusive growth? What is inclusive growth?
What is inclusive?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's the simplest thing in the world, actually, to define it. Now, whether you can achieve it or not is a separate. Inclusive growth, I've tried to define, many other people have tried to define. My definition, again, goes back to data. Inclusive growth means the growth of the bottom quarter of the population, income growth, again, is higher than the average. Simple. That's inclusive growth. Now, you can extend it. Now, you know, how many more women were involved, how many more whatever was involved, and you can extend that definition. But it's conceptually, inclusive growth is that how do I know that a larger fraction, literally it means a larger fraction of people are involved in the growth process. So I'm giving you a measure, simple. If your growth rate, if in this country, and I've done papers on this, happy to circulate, that this country shows inclusive growth, and this country does not. And then you use that information for whatever purposes you want. But it does answer the question of, there's a definition, very strict definition, of what is inclusive growth and what is not inclusive growth. Then you can come in, acha, we gave them roads and this and that. There'll always be slight exceptions. You know, in this area, the growth rate is less because infrastructure, investment was being done, and investment leads into income with a lag. Sab kuch, you know. Just keep it. The other principle in poverty measure is the KISS principle. Keep it simple, stupid. And you match I haven't thought of it, this is just, you match KISS with this economy is stupid. You've got more answers on what to do.
I think this is a very important session. लोगों प्लीज़ खुदा के वास्ते ये पॉवर्टी को समझने की कोशिश करो. ये जो नीजक रिएक्शन है पॉवर्टी मिटा दे. I know हम सब बचपन में सोशलिस्ट थे, हम सब सुर्खे थे. But I don't know. I don't think any of us wants to go to communism. अगर जाना है तो let's be clear. ये जो sneak in करना है पॉवर्टी के जरिए communism, मुझे नहीं समझाती. And I think Bhalla has moved on in the world. He used to be a good conservative free market economist, but you've now taken inclusive growth. So Bhalla ji, thank you very much. Thank you for this wonderful debate. All the best, ji.